Hello, everyone. Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay and see the slideshow screen? If you can't, let me know in the chat. Right, so my name is Neill Talbot and I'm a freelance ecologist based in Bristol. My company is called Avellana Ecology, and I've done quite a lot of work with Avon Needs trees, survey work, and guided walks and things like that. And also, I've been in Bristol for about 10 years. Before that, I was a conservation officer with Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust for 15 years. And my primary skill is botany, although I do other wildlife surveys and advice and training. So my website's detailed down there at the bottom, and I will mention that a bit more later at the end. But there's resources on there that some of you might find useful. So what I'm going to do is going to go through about 20 slides and talk for about 40 minutes about things that you can look at this time of year when there's no leaves on the trees or that there's very few leaves um, to help you identify which species of tree it is. And um, this time of year is a good time to start because there's still quite a lot of leaves on the tree. So you can associate some of the leaves with some of the winter ID features at the moment. So that's quite a good idea to start now, rather than start in middle of in the end of December, January, when there's absolutely, well, there could be a few leaves, but not that many. So I'm going to try and convince you that it's not as difficult as you might think to identify different tree species um, at this time of year. So we will be looking at various features. I'll go through that in a minute, but I'll just outline that I'll be talking about native broadleaf trees and naturalized broadleaf trees. So the difference between native and naturalized is that naturalized ones are ones that weren't originally here before the Ice Age, and they've been introduced, usually by humans, but sometimes by animals. So there's things like horse chestnut, which the picture on the left is a horse chestnut bud, which it seems to us, it feels like, that's like been a tree in this country forever, but it's like less than 400 years it's been in the UK. So it's native to Southern Europe. So there's other examples, things like sycamore, um, Norway maple, and London plane and things like that. But I'm mainly going to concentrate on native trees with a few of the naturalized ones, and I won't be covering conifers. It'll just be broadleaf trees. So I've just done a basic list here of things to look for when you're identifying a tree at this time of year. So there's first thing, probably the key thing to look at is the twigs and the buds. So the shape of the buds, um, the colour, what the scales are like on them, whether they're hairy or not, the twigs as well, similar things, what colour they are, whether they're knobbly or quite straight or angled, whether they're sort of brownish, greenish, greyish. It is quite surprising how much difference there is in the coloration of twigs and the shape of buds. So I will go through that when I go through the individual species. Another important factor is the bark. So I'll talk about that more in a moment. Then you've got the fruits and the flowers. So these two pictures on the top at the top are of hazel catkins, and the one on the top left is a hazel catkin um, at the early stages, and that's the male flower. And then the one on the right is the male flowers when they've developed. They spread out and become sort of more sort of yellowish. Um, and the picture immediately below the picture on the top right is a picture of the female flowers on the hazel. And these are tiny little pink flowers that appear on the bud. So that's quite a difficult thing to spot. But if you look closely on a hazel, um, sort of between now and February, you might see some of the female flowers as well as the male flowers. Um, Another thing I'll put a picture of at the bottom left is some leaves that they could be on the tree still, but there's some on the ground. But of course, you need to be wary about ones that are on the ground because they could have blown over from another tree. But if there's hundreds of leaves of one uh, species immediately below the tree you're looking at, there's a quite a high chance that's the tree species that you're looking at. Other things to look at are the form of the tree, the silhouette. Some have got more rounded, domed appearance, so things like an oak. Some are more triangular, like an alder. Then you'll get certain species that to be more have drooping branches, things like birches and so on. So there are various things you can look at, um, and you can identify trees from a distance just by the silhouette. Although I have to admit I'm not the best at doing that. Um, Another thing to be aware of is the habitat. So where the tree is growing, but I'll talk about that in a later slide.
Hi, Neil. Sorry to interrupt you. Would
Yeah.
you be able to put your slides to full screen?
Oh, sorry.
It's
Yeah,
okay.
I didn't realize they were. Mm, mm.
I think if you just hit slideshow, it should go into slideshow mode. So from that top,
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
one. Yeah.
Start.
Lovely.
Right, that's where I was. Yeah, sorry. I didn't realize that I hadn't done that.
Sorry, that's fine. Thanks, Neil.
So, first of all, I'll talk about the fruits on the on various trees. So there's basically four different types of fruits. There's a nut, a drupe, a samara or samara, and a pome. So nuts, a lot of you will be familiar with things like the acorns on the bottom left. Then you'll get things like chestnut, either sweet chestnut or horse chestnut, i.e. conker, hazelnuts, things like walnuts as well. You know, there's a lot of different nut species. Then you've got things like drupes, which these are um, a single hard stone enclosed within a fleshy layer. So things like a damson or a cherry, for example, also sloes, haws from hawthorn. Um, then you've got the other type of fruit that is like an edible fruit is a pome, and those are ones that have five or more seeds with a fleshy outer layer. So apple, and it was an example. Sorry, I said hawthorn earlier for drupe. I meant the hawthorns within the pomes actually. Then other typical fruits like pear, for example, and some of the other um, native species of tree that you'll regularly find, like rowan and whitebeam. The final one is the Samara or Samara. So ash keys are a great example of that. So you'll see if you look at the middle picture on the bottom, that's some ash keys drooping down from an ash twig, and they're very distinctive. A lot of the other ones that are this type of fruit won't have such a cluster of seeds. Um, and then you've got things like the maples, which the picture above it is the is some of the maple. I I call them helicopters. I think quite a lot of people do. And then other things that you'll have samaras for would be elm, for example. So there are a few different types. The other two pictures, top right is a spindle tree, which are these beautiful pink and orange fruits. They're poisonous, so don't try eating them. Um, but these are very distinctive. It's a native tree that you'll find in the understory in woodlands, but quite often in hedgerows as well. And the one below it is Gelder Rose, another native tree, and the berries look very inviting, but again, they're poisonous, so these aren't ones to be eaten. Um, so that's just an outline of some of the fruits you can see, but I will talk about those for specific species later. So next, I'll mention a bit about bark. The two pictures on the left side of the screen are of the same species. They're both ash. So the picture on the right of those two is a young ash species, ash tree. So that's got sort of quite a greyish green bark that's relatively smooth. But as it grows older, it will become fissured and grooved. So it'll have all these cracks down the bark. And you will find that with quite a lot of tree species. So you need to be a bit um, aware that they will look different as they get older. Um, but certain species are more distinctive throughout their lives. So the two pictures on the right, um, the one on the far right is a wild cherry, and that's got very distinctive shiny bark with these rings around them, which are things called lenticels, which are the breathing pores of the tree. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that on the next slide. And the one on the next to the cherry is a silver birch, which I expect a lot of you know both of these species anyway. Um, and that's got a very distinctive silver bark with sort of splits and sort of darker patches, which quite often are in a diamond shape on the bark. Right, so other features apart from the bark and all the other things I've mentioned are the lenticels. And what the lenticels are is they're breathing pores that are made of cork, and they allow gas exchange between the atmosphere and the internal tissues of the tree. And you'll get these all over the tree. They'll be more distinctive on certain species than others. So the picture on the in the middle of the lenticels, that's on a twig. So you can see the little pimply little um, dots on the twig, but you can also see on the cherry on the left where there's lots. Those rings are actually lots of little um, dots or lenticels all sort of almost joined together to make it look like a ring. Lenticels are quite distinctive on other species. A hazel, it's quite clear to see all the lenticels as well, but you can spot them on all trees, but there's some are more difficult to see than others are more noticeable. One of the other things to look at is the leaf scars. So on this picture on the right, this is a horse chestnut. So this is basically where the previous year's leaf has dropped off. Um, and this horse chestnut is basically a horseshoe shape. So that's partly why horse chestnuts got its name, because of that horseshoe. Um, and there'll be various different shapes and sizes to the leaf scars that can help you identify. I wouldn't say it's necessarily the most reliable thing to look at, but it's one of the things you can look at for certain species. So, as in a lot of the books, they do mention that for certain species. Right, so just going to say a bit more about structure and shape. So, here's an example of which trees have sort of certain types of structure. The oaks are very obviously have a rounded or domed crown. Um, it's slightly more noticeable if you've got an oak that's out on its own in a field, rather than one that's in a dense woodland surrounded by other trees, because its growth form gets affected slightly. But generally, is a good example of one with a domed crown. Birch, as you can see, the picture on the right have very drooping branches. Ash is quite distinctive in its growth form because it has got the domed top, but it's also got um, the branches sort of droop down slightly, but the twigs actually point upwards. Um, I don't know if I've got a picture of that, but look out when next time you see an ash, look out for that feature. That is quite distinctive. And as I mentioned earlier, alder's more of a triangular shape to it. Just moving on to the habitat, certain species are restricted to specific habitats, or they prefer certain habitats. So it doesn't necessarily mean you won't find a sessile oak in an area that's not acidic. It's just that it prefers that sort of area. Birch is a good example of a species that you will definitely find on acidic soil. You'll often find it in areas of heathland, and it will take over areas of where there's heathland without any, if you don't have any management. So a lot of sort of valuable heathland habitat, people, the whoever's managing the land will often have to control the birch, clear it back, and maybe just leave like occasional patches of it, because it is really suited to that acidic soil. At the other end of the scale, you've got calcareous soil. So spindle and wayfaring tree are more or less restricted to soil that is more on the calcareous or limestone end of the scale. Um, Ash is also quite likes calcareous soils, but it won't be purely restricted to it. It will be quite widespread. Then you've got a number of wetland species, particularly things like willows. There's quite a lot of native willow species, and also alder. Um, Another one that you'll get there in wetter areas is downy birch, rather than silver birch. So there are yeah, there are quite a lot of differences. Some species are more suited to open land, um, and some are purely um, found in woodland areas or scrubby areas. And again, some species um, nowadays you'll find them more in a hedgerow rather than in a woodland. So now I'm just going to go through a few different species and cover a couple of species here that are quite similar and people can get confused um, at certain times of year. So um, I've put the scientific names on this slide because it's always useful to try and learn the scientific names because it can help you see what genus they are and what other species they're related to. So blackthorn is the genus is Prunus and the specific name is Spinosa. So Prunus shows that it's related to things like cherry, damson, plum, and so on. Um, Both of these are actually in the rose family, um, but hawthorn is a different genus. So that's Crataegus monogyna. So in the winter, one of the key things to look at if they've still got the fruit on is the fruit. So the hawthorn's got these quite small, hard red berries known as haws, and the blackthorn has got slightly larger berries called sloes. Um, and they're a sort of bluish purple color. They often have this sort of like slightly sort of um, blushed look to them. Um, but they can look completely dark, almost black. So those are quite distinctive features to look at. The other things I've put pictures of are the twigs with the buds. So if you see the picture at the bottom left of the hawthorn twig, they have quite short spines with the buds immediately at the base of the buds of the spines, sorry, in most occasions. You might very occasionally find some buds along the spines, but it's more usual to find them all at the base of the spine. And and the twigs tend to be sort of fairly brownish to grey, fairly pale. The blackthorn, on the other hand, that has these very long spines. This you can't really see it that well in this picture, but the spines will have buds all the way along them in most cases, as well as at the base where the spines join the twig. And also they're more angular. Um, they're sort of more straight angles on the blackthorn, and the color of it tends to be darker than the hawthorn. And another difference between the hawthorn and the blackthorn is that the bark is greyish and it flakes off um, in sort of patches um, as it grows, whereas the blackthorn has a very black, dark or black bark, and the bark tends to peel off. When you're getting towards the early spring, another difference you'll see is quite early on, even in January, February, sometimes the blackthorn will be starting to flower. So it'll have these little white flowers, and they will um, they will come out before the leaves come out. Whereas on hawthorn, the leaves will come out sort of March probably, and then the flowers in April. So they are different in that respect as well. So just do a quick bit about the oaks. So there are only two native oak species in the UK. The peduncular oak, Quercus robur, also known as English oak, and the sessile oak, Quercus petraea. I've also put on this slide a non-native one, which has become quite widespread, the turkey oak, Quercus cerris, just to show you some of the differences. So one of the things to look at with the peduncular oak is that it has acorns that are on long stalks. So I think you can see from this picture that there's a cluster of acorns, but they have got a long stalk that reaches to the twig where the leaves join on. But the sessile oak has no stalk on it. So sessile means unstalked, and it refers to the acorns. To confuse, it's quite easy to get this the wrong way round because the leaves are the other way round. So on the sessile oak, they have quite a long stalk on the leaves, but on the peduncular or English oak, they have a very short or non-existent stalk on the leaves. So that's quite useful to know. Another thing is you can tell by the buds um, on the twigs. Um, this this is a bit tricky, but it can be done. Um, if there's less than 20 scales on the buds, it's a peduncular oak. If there's more than 20, it's a sessile oak. And another thing that you can look at for telling the difference between the native ones and the turkey oak is the turkey oak actually has whiskers on the buds, but it also has sort of whiskers around the base of the acorn cup. So it is very obvious the difference between the turkey oak and the native oaks, even in the winter. All right, I'll just quickly go through ash. So ash, another one of our common species, although sadly it's been declining now because of the ash dieback. So there's the picture of the buds shows they are extremely distinctive. There's no other native species that has got these dark chocolate brown or black buds, um, which are quite large. I didn't mention earlier, but the buds at the tip of the twig are known as the terminal bud, and the ones on either side are the lateral buds, and those are usually smaller. And on the ash, they're arranged or opposite each other. So you'll see in this picture that the two lateral buds are immediately in line with each other. Um, the picture in the middle shows the bark, which I talked about a bit already, that it does become quite grooved and fissured as it gets older. Probably not quite as much as an oak tree might, but it is quite distinctive as it gets older. And then, as mentioned previously, there's the ash keys, which which are very different to the fruits of a lot of other trees, where you've got the sort of helicopters that are consist of two seeds rather than multiple seeds in one bunch. So just to illustrate that, here's here's a couple of native and naturalized species of maple. So field maple, Acer campestre, is strictly speaking probably the only native maple we've got. There's been a lot of different ones introduced, especially ornamental ones. The sycamore, it's debatable. There's some thought now that it may be actually native, but it's been here a very long time, so thousands of years. It has been found in sort of pollen cores that have been sampled. So yeah, sycamore's been here a long time, but the field maple is undoubtedly native. So they both have opposite buds. So the lateral buds are opposite each other. On the sycamore, you've got these sort of big fat green buds with quite pale scales on them. So the terminal bud, again, like the ash, is very much larger than the lateral buds. And then the field maple, which is closely related, that also has opposite buds, but they're quite hairy with sort of whitish scales on them. So they're quite distinctive and very different to the sycamore, and generally it's a smaller tree as well. So apart from that, you can look at the seeds. So the helicopter on the sycamore on the left, that's more like a sort of drooping moustache, and the field maple on the right is sort of a more or less straight across. So they're quite different. The bark is a bit different as well. You get bark that's very flaky on more mature sycamores. On a field maple, you get this thing on the twigs and branches as well as on the bark that's called the crocodile back. So it looks very corky. So there's a couple of other species that can look a bit like this, like some of the elm, particularly English elm, and also elder, but they have very different buds and other features. So the next ones I'll look at is the two native species that are closely related from the beech family. Um, Beech, Fagus sylvatica, and hornbeam, Carpinus betulus. So they are closely related, but they're not the same genus. So beech, slightly larger tree, um, generally has quite a smooth greyish bark, but unless it gets to veteran status where it's hundreds of years old, where it does become slightly more grooved, but they're very unusual to see trees like that. So generally it will be quite smooth bark. The hornbeam has these very distinctive ridged bark, beautiful patterns. Um, and then you've got the fruits and the buds. So the fruits of the hornbeam, bottom right, they're they're more in the summer. The flowers come out, and those will develop. And the beech, you get beech nuts or beech mast is another name for them, and they give their name also to like when there's a plentiful year of fruit and nuts. So they call it a mast year. So you'd get like this year you've had loads of beech nuts, beech mast, and also lots of acorns and other fruits. Um, haven't really got time to go through that, but it's a strategy for trees survival, to produce more in certain years. And the twigs and the buds. So the beech on the left, the twigs are sort of quite long and slender, and you've got a cigar-shaped bud, very long and pointed, and the buds stick out slightly from the twig. On the hornbeam, they're similar shape, not quite as pointed, but they're more sort of pressed onto the twig, so they don't stick out to the same extent. And as I said, it's generally most things about the hornbeam will be smaller. You can get quite mature trees, but not to the size of a beech. Horse chestnut, and talked about, like the buds are very distinctive. It's this is one where it's quite good to actually touch it and feel what it feels like, because they're extremely sticky when the buds come out, and that's a feature of the horse chestnut more than any other tree. And they're huge buds as well, bigger than things like the sycamore, for example. And then they're familiar with the conkers, the horse chestnut. Uh, just quickly say a bit about dogwood, Cornus sanguinea. It's also known as blood twig. Um, so the twigs are often very reddish, dark red, but they can be green in the shade. So occasionally you see like one side of the tree is green and one is red. And they have these quite small pointy buds as well. And these are opposite each other as well. Another one I mentioned earlier, the alder, species of wetland. This is unique as it's got cones on it. So it's the only native broadleaf tree that has cones. So the cones are the female fruits, as you'll see on the picture on the left. And you also get the male catkins on that. So similar to things like on the birch or a hazel. And the twigs have buds which are very purple as well. It doesn't show it that well in this picture, but if you see buds that are purple, it's quite likely to be alder. So I think I've almost finished. So I've just got a few references. The book that I would recommend the most if you want to learn winter tree ID is Winter Trees: A Photographic Guide to Common Trees and Shrubs. And that's an AIDGAP Field Studies Council book. There are others, I won't go through all of them. And I've also got some resources on my website. So there's a 12 common trees in winter handout and reference sheet. That includes more references for books that are useful. Another book I'd highly recommend, not so much for ID, but it goes through the tree families of the world and interesting biology and information about trees, is called A Secret Life of Trees, and it's by Colin Tudge. I'd highly recommend people reading that. One more thing, there's various plant ID apps you can use. I use PlantNet, but I've been told that by a lot of people that Flora Incognita and Leaf Snap are useful, and that can help you get to the right genus and then narrow it down to what species it is. And finally, I've got a little poem here. I'm not going to read it out, but I'm just going to let you read it yourselves. It's quite a useful reminder of some of the things, features of different species that can help remind you of what they are. So I'll just won't say anything for half a minute and let you take that in. Okay, so I'm ready for questions if there's any questions.
Thank you, Neil. That was absolutely wonderful. I almost missed questions as I was so busy taking notes because there's a lot of great tips there. I can
You want
see
me to
there's
keep sharing this or leave this up or
I don't mind, up to you.
okay, I'm happy to leave it there. So
So we've got one question in the chat
mm.
from Rosemary Hill. Rosemary, I'm not sure if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question. If not, then I will do my best to ask it for you.
Yeah. Okay. It's just looking at the horse chestnut fruit, the conker.
Mm.
I noticed that particular one didn't have prickles on it, and I did recently see in Ashton Court a horse chestnut, which I looked up on iNatural, and it was Aesculus indica, and that was covered in conkers, and they didn't have any prickles. They were smooth, such as the one in your picture. Anyway, I just wondered if you concur, or maybe I missed something out.
Yeah, I think that's the Indian horse chestnut, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I haven't seen many of. I know I have seen that at Blaze Castle, um, but yeah, I think that is the case. I'm not 100% sure because if I'd realised I'd put that picture in, I probably would have used the one that I knew was definitely a native one.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. It's just a point of interest
Yeah,
anyway.
that is yeah, it's good to know that because it's useful to know that it might be a different species or subspecies.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, many thanks.
Thank you.
We've had another question just asking if you could repeat the names of the apps, please, Neil.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. So I can put it back onto that slide actually.
And
So
then just reminding everyone, yeah, to keep the questions coming in the chat if you want, or feel free to raise your hand and then unmute and ask your question. So we've got the lovely plant apps there. Thank you. And Lily's asking, do you think it's possible to ID a tree on the bark alone?
um, it is with some species. I wouldn't rely on it for a lot of tree species. I would prefer to look at a range of features if I can to try and ascertain exactly what it is. But yeah, it is, some of the ones like the cherry, wild cherry, there it tends to be quite a clear um, feature. So, and also you do need to be aware that there is another native cherry species, the bird cherry, but that differs from the wild cherry in that the bark isn't shiny. It's sort of more like a matte finish to it, rather than it being a shiny bark. So you should, for certain species, be able to tell just from the bark, but I wouldn't rely on it for the majority of species.
Okay, so B Yen is asking, when it comes to trees that have been introduced, how does that affect native trees?
It does vary quite a lot. So things like sycamore, they can spread quite rapidly in a woodland, and they can alter the balance of the woodland. Um, Although they don't seem to have had like such a big impact as some people feared. But on the other hand, you've got things like the turkey oak, and that can spread some diseases, so that will have an impact. Then you've got certain other, some of the conifers and things like rhododendron, which can have if they're sort of planted in areas of good woodland, they will actually shade out a lot of areas, and reduce the diversity of the woodland, reduce the range of ground flora species you'll get. Another example of that is things like the holm oak, which when you get a mature holm oak, which isn't a native species, that will actually shade out huge areas, and sort of you'll lose quite a lot of the ground flora, plants that you'd get, say, in an ancient woodland.
That's really interesting. Liz is lovely comment saying it was an excellent presentation, Neill. So thank you for sharing your knowledge in such an
Thank you.
accessible way. I heartily agree with that, as I'm sure
That's
many
nice.
others will.
Thanks.
And then Lily's Anderson's jumped in again asking, do you use fungi to help you ID trees at all? And is it helpful to know which trees fungi grow on or near to?
Not, I wouldn't say I do particularly. I'd say it's more the other way around, that I might be able to identify a type of fungi by what tree it's on.
I've got one for you, Neill. We're just giving everyone else a pause to see if there's any more questions going to come through. But certainly for me, and I know it'll be many others on the call as well, we're dealing with what's known in the trade as whips,
Yeah.
bare rooted twigs that are dormant baby trees, and we're moving them out of temporary tree nurseries and into the ground in the winter. So have you got any tips for helping to identify dormant whips? Because obviously we don't have the bark of the mature tree and the overall shape of the crown when we're dealing with that.
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is to learn the buds, particularly the bud shape and the bud arrangement and the structure of the twigs. So I didn't really go through this in much detail, but the three different types of bud arrangement are, like, there's opposite buds, which I showed a few of those. There's alternate buds, which are ones that go alternately up the twig, which is quite a lot of species do that. And then there's the spiraled ones, which spiral around the twig. So willows are a great example of that, and also oaks, and how clustered the buds are. So good example, the one that's got a cluster of terminal buds would be the English oak, but also the wild cherry as well. So there are things you can look out for, but predominantly the buds and twigs, I'd say, at that stage of a tree.
And you've already given us the great reference to that then from John Poland's book, then, A Field Guide to Winter Twigs.
Yeah. There was another book I was going to mention. There's a new wild guide to trees that I haven't got yet, but it's on my Christmas list. So, but that includes winter twigs, and it's got brilliant reviews. So that might be one it's worth people getting if they want to learn as well as the FSC one or John Poland.
So that was the Wild Guide to Winter Twigs. Yeah.
It's not, it's just a tree, it's just a general tree book, but it includes winter ID features.
Lovely. We'll get that on our Christmas list then.
Yeah.
I think we've still, if you're happy to keep going, we've got a couple of minutes left. So
that's fine.
there's two more questions. I'm going to jump in with the first one, the last one first, because it's a bit quicker. and it's from Ruth, who's just asking
Mm.
what causes the crocodile bark that you mentioned in the field maples.
Yeah, I've just seen that. To be honest, I'm not sure. I think it's just a feature of certain species do have that more sort of ridged, corky look to them. But I will investigate that. It probably says in the Secret Life of Trees that I mentioned, and I've probably forgotten what the sort of genetic reason, biological reason for that is. But yeah, there are a few species that do that.
Thank you for not just the answer but the honesty there. I'm always so heartened when I hear ecologists, botanists talk about forgetting bits of information as well. It's
Yeah,
not just me. That's always good to hear.
There's only so much information my brain can hold onto forever.
And of course, it always helps when you're seeing things regularly to drill them into the
Yeah,
brain.
that is it. The key thing is just to keep practicing or go out with people and learn from them, in people who can ID things and show you the things to look at.
And that's of course a great segue to suggest joining us in the spring or in the summer for some of your in-person tree ID walks that Susan organises throughout the year. So yeah, we hope
Yeah,
you'll come back and do that soon. I'm
yeah,
aware
that would
there's a
be great.
question from Jacqueline here, which is not an easy or quick answer, and it's 1 minute to 8. But in all fairness, I'll share it, and maybe you can just give us a tidbit to leave us with some food for thought. So, Jacqueline's asking what could be done to prevent tree diseases.
There's quite a lot of things, and it's starting to happen. The reason we got ash dieback is because we imported quite a lot of ash saplings from places like Denmark, and I can't remember if it was Denmark, but it was Europe, when there's absolutely no need to do that. I think there is a better sort of tree policy now that we try not to bring things in that could be spreading disease. But just on another quick point, if we've got time, there has been recent research on ashes, and they said they have found that there are more of the native ash trees that are resistant to the disease. So there is some hope.
Thank you for turning that around into a hopeful moment to end on, that our native ash are fighting back and are showing signs of resilience. Absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Neill. And there's been loads of thank yous coming through as well. People very pleased. I'm just going to hand over to see if Susan would like to say anything to wrap us up.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to echo Neill. Thank you for your really, really clear and helpful presentation tonight. I think all of us will be able to identify some of those winter trees so much more easily. Yeah, and just to remind people again that there is a follow-on email coming out now, which will have links to Neill's website, to the Avon Needs Trees website, a feedback form if anybody wants to feed in how great it was or anything they'd like to raise about how we could improve our online events. So please do have a look at that email. And yeah, as I said, our tree planting days are online on the website, so please do come and join us in creating more woodlands. And yes, as Deb said, we've had Neill on site over the last couple of years at Great Avon Wood, walking around and actually looking at spring, summer and autumn trees in situ, and I'm really hoping we'll be able to do that again next year, so come and see in person and learn about all the seasonal trees.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thanks